Maple Ridge was the kind of suburban neighborhood that looked perfect from the outside. Immaculate lawns, pastel-colored houses lined in neat symmetry, and an air of quiet superiority that the HOA loved to maintain. But beneath that calm exterior simmered tension, pride, and secrets. Among the residents stood two neighboring homes that couldn't be more different. On one side, the Bennetts, a young couple with 2 kids, recently moved in, full of hope and optimism. On the other, Mrs. Caroline Henderson, known by everyone as Karen. She was the self-proclaimed queen of Maple Ridge, always watching, always judging. Her lawn was trimmed to perfection, her mailbox painted twice a year, and her window shades always at the exact HOA-approved angle. But her obsession with control didn't stop at her property line. When the Bennetts moved in, bringing laughter, toys scattered on the front lawn, and the occasional sound of children playing, Karen decided they didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. From the moment their moving truck arrived, she took mental notes of every possible infraction. The wrong shade of blue on their mailbox, a slightly tilted fence post, a welcome mat that wasn't a neutral. At first, the Bennetts thought her constant suggestions were attempts at kindness. They smiled, thanked her, and tried to blend in. But as weeks passed, Karen's tone shifted. Notes started appearing on their door, unsigned, but written in that unmistakable cursive that every neighbor recognized. Please adhere to HOA guidelines. E-noise levels must remain within community standards. A grass height exceeds policy limits. What began as small complaints soon turned into a campaign. Karen's dissatisfaction grew into an obsession. Every morning she stood behind her curtains, watching the Bennetts' every move. She started taking pictures of their kids' bikes left near the sidewalk, of their trash bins a few inches off from the curb, of their garage door left open for more than 5 minutes. The Bennetts didn't know it yet, but their dream home had turned into a silent battlefield. Karen's goal wasn't compliance. It was eviction. In her eyes, they didn't deserve to be there. And soon she would find a way to make that official. The first step was already in motion. She had begun gathering evidence to present to the HOA board, and she wouldn't stop until she saw that house gone. What Karen didn't know was that her obsession would soon uncover her own downfall. And when the truth came out, the neighborhood she ruled would finally see who she really was. The perfect neighborhood was about to reveal its cracks, and the first one had just appeared next door. The stage was set. The war had quietly begun. The Bennetts had no idea what was coming next, but neither did Karen. Because in the house she thought she controlled, there was one secret even she couldn't hide forever. The next chapter would begin with the first formal complaint. A lie that would spiral completely out of her control. It started with a letter. Official, stamped with the HOA seal and neatly folded into the Bennetts' mailbox on a crisp Monday morning. The paper smelled faintly of new ink, as if written in haste but with careful intent. It accused the Bennetts of violating 5 community codes: unapproved exterior paint, excessive yard clutter, unauthorized structure, improper waste management, and noise disturbance. Each accusation was accompanied by photo evidence, all taken from the same angle, Karen's living room window. The Bennetts were stunned. They had just moved in 2 months ago, spent every weekend improving their property, and even attended the last HOA meeting to introduce themselves. Now, they were suddenly being threatened with fines and potential legal action. What they didn't know was that Karen had been planning this for weeks. She had combed through the HOA rulebook, cross-referencing each guideline with their house. When nothing substantial appeared, she created her own narrative. She snapped photos during odd moments, a toy left on the grass, a shed door open mid-repair, and twisted them into supposed violations. Then she wrote a persuasive email to the HOA board, playing the role of a concerned resident. In her letter, she painted the Bennetts as disruptive newcomers who were lowering neighborhood standards. She spoke about how their unapproved shed might be used as a rental unit, how their children created unsafe conditions on the sidewalks, and how the overall aesthetic harmony of the community was being threatened. The HOA, already weary of minor disputes, decided to investigate. They didn't know Karen personally beyond her spotless reputation and her endless stream of helpful reminders. To them, she was reliable, trustworthy, a model homeowner. So they took her word seriously. Within a week, an HOA compliance officer was scheduled to visit the Bennetts' home. Karen watched it unfold from behind her curtain, satisfaction burning in her eyes. As the officer measured fence lines and took photos, she sipped her coffee slowly, convinced that justice, her version of it, was being served. That evening, she added one more note to her logbook, a small binder she kept hidden in her kitchen drawer. Every page detailed her progress. Dates, times, observations. It wasn't about the rules anymore. It was about power. And yet, for all her smugness, a quiet unease lurked behind her pride. She had something to hide, too. Something she had spent years concealing behind her perfect garden and flawless facade. If anyone ever looked too closely, they'd see it. The extra room she built without a permit. A hidden extension at the back of her house that the HOE never knew about. But Karen had always believed she was untouchable. She thought no one would ever question her. Not after all these years of control. Not until now. Because that single complaint, that one letter she had crafted so carefully, would set into motion an inspection that would reach much closer to her own door than she ever expected. As the Bennetts prepared to defend themselves, the next phase of her plan was about to begin, and with it, the first cracks in her perfect world. The day of the inspection arrived beneath a bright sky, deceptively calm and clean. The Bennetts stood on their porch, uneasy but polite, as the HOA inspector, Mr. Harold Sutton, stepped out of his white sedan, clipboard in hand. He was a middle-aged man with a weary expression, the kind of person who had seen far too many neighborhood squabbles dressed up as official complaints. He greeted them formally, explaining that this was a standard procedure and that the HOA required a thorough review. Inside, the Bennetts exchanged worried glances. They had nothing to hide, but the weight of false accusations made them nervous. As Mr. Sutton began his assessment, he meticulously checked every corner of the property. The freshly painted shutters, the trimmed hedges, the shed that Karen had photographed. He found nothing remotely out of order. Everything was within regulation. Still, he continued his checklist, snapping his own photos for documentation. Across the street, Karen watched from her window, pretending to water her plants while her phone recorded every moment. She wanted proof of the Bennetts' supposed panic, though all she captured was their quiet confusion. When Mr. Sutton reached the back of the property, he paused at the fence. Beyond it, he noticed Karen's yard, lush, almost unnaturally so. A perfect green lawn, a gazebo wrapped in flowering vines, and a section that seemed unusual. He couldn't quite place it, but the ground appeared slightly uneven, as if something had been built and disguised. He made a mental note but continued his job. After 2 hours, his inspection was complete. He found minor issues, things any homeowner could fix in minutes, but nothing close to the violations described in the complaint. The Bennetts were relieved when he assured them that they'd receive an official report soon. Karen, however, was frustrated. She expected chaos, resistance, maybe even anger. Instead, she saw calmness. She needed another angle. That evening, she sent a follow-up message to the HOA board, claiming that the inspector had overlooked critical evidence. She mentioned a structural violations that hinted that the Bennett's shed might contain a plumbing connections, implying an illegal conversion. Her words were crafted carefully and they worked. The board decided to authorize a secondary inspection, this time involving a county building inspector rather than just the HOA representative. It was a level of escalation Karen hadn't expected to succeed so easily. Now she was excited. She imagined the Bennetts fined, humiliated, maybe even forced to move. She didn't realize that county inspectors followed different procedures. They didn't just inspect the accused property, they reviewed surrounding structures for comparative assessment. That meant when they came to check the Bennett's home, they would also look at hers. And that uneven patch of land behind her house, the one she thought she'd hidden perfectly beneath flowers and vines, would soon become the reason everything she built, her reputation, her control, her perfect facade, came crashing down. The inspection she demanded for her neighbors was about to come right to her own backyard. The second inspection was different. It wasn't just another haste-throw-away formality. It was official, serious, and recorded by the county's property division. When the county inspector arrived, his presence alone changed the tone of the neighborhood. He wore a bright yellow vest and carried a tablet loaded with property maps and permit records. His demeanor was neutral but firm, a man who had no patience for petty neighborhood politics. The Bennetts welcomed him respectfully, explaining the situation and presenting their documents. The shed permit, home repair approvals, even receipts from licensed contractors. Everything was legitimate. The inspector nodded, clearly unimpressed with the accusations. He began his examination methodically, starting from the front lawn and moving around the perimeter. His trained eyes missed nothing. He measured fence distances, checked building materials, and compared them with the property plans on his tablet. Everything matched perfectly. But as he reached the back fence, he noticed something that made him pause. On the other side, Karen's side, there was an unusual structure half hidden behind a curtain of vines and trellises. It didn't appear on the county's satellite map or the property layout. He zoomed in, frowned slightly, and made a note on his tablet. According to county records, Karen's house was a standard single-family model with a 2-car garage and a small patio. But what he saw behind her home didn't fit that description. It looked like an enclosed space, an extension of some sort, maybe a storage room, maybe more. The Bennetts noticed his gaze drifting and asked quietly if something was wrong, but he assured them he was just verifying property boundaries. He completed the rest of his check and thanked them for their cooperation, promising to file the report within 48 hours. Karen, of course, had been watching everything from her porch. She smiled smugly, thinking the inspector had found new violations. When he briefly crossed into her view, clipboard in hand, she even waved at him with false cheer. The inspector returned the gesture politely, but with an expression that betrayed curiosity. That evening, back at the county office, he reviewed the entire case. The HOA complaint from Karen was detailed yet inconsistent. The photographic evidence didn't align with his own finding. The Bennett's property matched every legal requirement, while something about Karen's own lot coordinates seemed off. He dug deeper into the records and discovered that her property hadn't been inspected in over 8 years since before a new zoning code took effect. That code specifically required homeowners to apply for a permit before adding any enclosed structures to their property. Karen's file showed no such permit. A red flag. He bookmarked the case for follow-up and scheduled an additional field visit for the following week. Meanwhile, word began spreading quietly through Maple Ridge. The HOA board had been expecting a quick resolution, but the county's involvement made everyone nervous. Neighbors started whispering. Some thought the Bennetts were in serious trouble. Others suspected Karen had gone too far. For the first time in years, her reputation was being questioned, softly, cautiously, but the seeds of doubt were planted. And as the county inspector prepared his report, Karen's carefully crafted illusion of control was beginning to unravel. The next inspection would not be routine. It would be personal. And when the county official stepped onto her property, the secret she'd buried for years would no longer stay hidden. The morning of the follow-up inspection came quietly, with the hum of sprinklers echoing across Maple Ridge. Karen stood on her porch in a pastel blouse, her hair perfectly set, projecting her usual aura of superiority. She had no idea the inspector wasn't coming for the Bennetts this time. When the county vehicle pulled up in front of her home, her first reaction was delight. She assumed the Bennetts were finally facing consequences. But that smile faltered when the inspector walked past their driveway and headed directly toward her. He introduced himself, explaining that his department was conducting a routine verification of property compliance in the area. Karen's heart skipped. She tried to act casual, but her mind raced. The vines behind her house suddenly seemed too obvious, too deliberate. Still, she invited him in, feigning innocence. He moved efficiently, inspecting the main structure and comparing it with the property records displayed on his tablet. Everything matched until they reached the backyard. There, half concealed behind rows of blooming roses and latticework, stood a door she had painted to blend with the exterior wall. The inspector stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tapped on the tablet. There was no mention of a rear extension in the official plans. He asked for access. Karen hesitated for only a second, but that pause spoke volumes. She mumbled about it being just a garden shed, though her tone trembled slightly. Reluctantly, she unlocked the door. The inspector stepped inside, and the truth revealed itself instantly. It wasn't a shed. It was a full room, furnished, wired, and insulated. A small kitchen counter sat along one wall. A ceiling fan rotated lazily overhead. There was even a mounted air conditioner humming quietly, trying to hide years of misuse. The space looked lived in, The inspector noted the interior modifications, the plumbing connections, and the electrical rewiring, none of which appeared in any permit or record. Karen stood frozen as he took photos, each shutter click echoing like a countdown. She tried to explain that it was an old project from years ago, something she'd forgotten to report. But the inspector's expression remained professional and detached. He informed her that the structure would require immediate review for code compliance and safety. As he left, he added that unpermitted additions could result in serious fines or even demolition orders. When his vehicle finally drove away, Karen stood motionless in her yard, her manicured fingers clutching the garden gate. For years, she had built her image on perfection, on knowing every rule, following every code, and reporting every violation. But now she was the violator. And worse, the entire neighborhood had seen the inspector leave her property, not the Bennetts. Within hours, whispers began to ripple through Maple Ridge. Why was the county at Karen's house? Did she fail her inspection? Maybe she's not as perfect as she says. The same curiosity she once weaponized against others was now turning toward her. Inside her home, she paced relentlessly, staring at the hidden room she once admired as her personal masterpiece. What began as a small secret convenience had now become her undoing. But Karen wasn't one to surrender easily. If she was going down, she was determined to drag the Bennetts with her. The next step in her plan would be desperate and dangerous. That evening, as the sun dipped below the tidy rooftops of Maple Ridge, Karen's calm exterior began to crack. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from nosy neighbors pretending to check in, their curiosity barely disguised. Every vibration made her stomach twist tighter. She could almost hear the whispers outside, people she had once ruled with her Hoa influence now murmuring about her unapproved construction. For the first time, she wasn't the enforcer. She was the scandal. Inside her house, Karen paced from window to window, her mind spinning. She couldn't let this ruin her. That hidden room was more than just an illegal addition. It was the physical embodiment of her control. She had built it secretly years ago, hiring unlicensed labor to create a quiet retreat away from everyone. It was her perfect space, the one part of her life untouched by Hoa scrutiny. Losing it would mean losing her image, her comfort, and the fear she inspired in others. She refused to let that happen. As the panic deepened, Karen decided to act before the county report became public. She convinced herself that if she could discredit the Bennetts completely, the focus might shift back to them. She sat at her desk, opening her laptop and composing a new complaint. This time, it wasn't about grass or sheds. It was about unauthorized electrical wiring and safety hazards. She even attached an old photo of exposed cables, though they weren't from the Bennetts' home. She'd taken them years ago from another house in a different neighborhood. It didn't matter. The goal was distraction. She sent the email to both the HOA board and the county inspector, making it sound urgent and dramatic. But desperation has a scent, and her message carried it. The inspector, now familiar with her name, flagged the email immediately. Instead of believing her claims, he reviewed her open violation case. He noticed the sudden timing of her new complaint. Just days after being cited for an unpermitted structure, it looked like retaliation. Meanwhile, the HOA board had begun distancing itself from her. Their group chat, once full of her suggestions and reminders, had gone silent. One board member quietly mentioned that Karen's credibility might be in question. The cracks were spreading. That night, Karen went outside, flashlight in hand, and began pulling down the vines from her backyard trellis. She thought maybe if she cleared the plants, the structure would look less suspicious. But in her frantic tearing, she only exposed more of what she hoped to hide. Electrical conduits running along the wall, pipes leading into the foundation, evidence of construction that could no longer be denied. The next morning, her worst fear arrived. The county sent a notice. A formal violation had been logged, and a hearing was scheduled. She was instructed not to make any changes to her property until the review. A stop work order was issued. She stood in her driveway, paper trembling in her hand when she saw the Bennetts across the street. They weren't gloating or smirking. They simply looked sorry for her. That stung more than anger ever could. For a woman who thrived on dominance, pity was unbearable. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The county hearing would uncover every lie she had built her reputation upon. Yet, in that fragile moment, Karen wasn't ready to surrender. She still had one weapon left, her ability to manipulate the HOA and twist the narrative. She just needed to find the right weakness to exploit. The next chapter of her war wouldn't be fought with complaints. It would be fought with deceit, charm, and one final gamble that could either save her or destroy her completely. Karen woke the next morning with a new plan forming in her mind. She had spent years mastering manipulation through subtlety, carefully chosen words, veiled suggestions, and feigned concern. Now, she would use those same tactics to save herself. Her goal was simple: regain control of the narrative before the county hearing. The neighborhood couldn't see her as guilty, they had to see her as misunderstood. She began by drafting a long email to the HOA board, filled with emotional undertones and deflections. She claimed she had been unfairly targeted because of her long-standing role in upholding community standards. She painted the inspection as a misunderstanding caused by incorrect records and a miscommunication between the county and the AO. To make herself appear sympathetic, she hinted at personal struggles, health issues, loneliness, stress, all fabricated but believable enough to elicit compassion. Then she subtly redirected the spotlight. She suggested that the Bennett's recent arrival had brought unnecessary tension to the neighborhood and that their defensive attitude during inspections had created confusion. The email was manipulative perfection, a blend of guilt, blame, and self-victimization. Within hours, it began circulating beyond the board. Karen had purposely left her message visible in the community email chain, knowing it would leak. And it did. Some neighbors immediately pitied her. Others rolled their eyes, suspecting her motives. The HOA president, however, wasn't easily swayed. After weeks of receiving complaints from Karen about nearly every household, he had started keeping a private record of her behavior. He had also received a quiet call from the county inspector earlier that week, warning him that Karen might attempt to interfere with the ongoing violation process. The HOA president decided to take a step back and let the truth surface naturally. Meanwhile, Karen's desperation only deepened. She began hosting a casual chats with her closest allies in the neighborhood, people who once looked up to her. Over tea and forced smiles, she spoke about how unfairly she was being treated, dropping hints that the Bennetts had friends in local government helping them. It was a lie, of course, but gossip spread faster than facts. Soon, conversations at mailboxes and sidewalks turned uneasy. The Bennetts noticed the shift, the polite smiles replaced by hesitant glances. They didn't understand why, but the county inspector did. He had been tracking Karen's communications quietly, noting how every false claim she made only reinforced her intent to deceive. He began preparing evidence for the hearing. Photos, correspondence, timestamps, even the false complaint emails she had sent. Karen had no idea that every step she took to protect herself was adding to the case against her. Late one evening, she sat in her darkened living room, the glow of her computer screen reflecting off her face. She reread her own lies and started to believe them, convincing herself that she was the real victim. Her mind twisted reality until she no longer saw guilt, only justification. She poured another glass of wine and told herself she still had time to fix everything. But outside, the neighborhood had already turned. The very silence that once obeyed her now felt heavy with judgment. The vines she had torn down still lay across her yard like remnants of her downfall. The county hearing was only days away, and Karen didn't know that the inspector was about to bring evidence that would not only expose her lies, but also uncover something far worse hidden behind her illegal room, a discovery that would shock the entire neighborhood and finally end her reign. The day of the hearing dawned gray and tense. The community center, usually reserved for HOA meetings and local events, buzzed with whispers and anxious energy. Nearly half the neighborhood had shown up, pretending to care about a transparency, but everyone knew why they were really there: to see Karen fall. She arrived early, wearing a neatly pressed blazer, her chin high, her smile rehearsed. But beneath the confident exterior, her stomach churned. The county inspector, Mr. Dalton, sat near the front with a thick folder in hand. The HOA board gathered behind a long table, their expressions unreadable. The Bennetts sat quietly at the back, uncertain whether to feel nervous or vindicated. The hearing began formally. The HOA president opened with a summary of the incident, the original complaint, the inspection, and the subsequent discovery of Karen's unpermitted structure. Karen listened, pretending calm, occasionally nodding, as if in agreement with the facts. When it was her turn to speak, she launched into her carefully prepared defense. She spoke about her years of service at a neighborhood, her dedication to order, and her unwavering intent to protect property values. Her words were polished, rehearsed, and utterly hollow. She painted herself as a victim of miscommunication, blaming the county for losing her supposed permit records. She ended with a plea for understanding, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. For a brief moment, some neighbors seemed moved. Then the inspector stood up. He began by acknowledging Karen's long history of community involvement, but then he opened the folder. Inside were photos, documents, and screenshots, each piece meticulously labeled. He started with her backyard. Photographs of the hidden room, the unregistered plumbing and wiring, and the evidence of recent modifications. He then displayed copies of county records showing that no permits had ever been filed for any addition to her property. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Karen's fingers clenched on the table. But then came the twist no one expected. The inspector explained that during his secondary examination of her property, he had noticed a secondary wiring circuit feeding from the illegal room into another concealed space under her patio. When his team investigated, they discovered an old makeshift water line and stored materials, proof of previous unlicensed construction that violated not just HOA rules, but state housing safety codes. The structure wasn't just unapproved, it was unsafe. The inspector presented the final image, a corroded electrical junction buried beneath wooden flooring inches away from dry insulation. It was a fire hazard waiting to ignite. The room fell silent. Karen's face drained of color. She tried to protest, insisting she had no idea such wiring existed, but her earlier inspection statements contradicted her. The inspector calmly pointed out her written acknowledgement of having installed a cooling unit herself, proof that she had knowingly modified the space. The HOA president exhaled slowly, turning toward her with visible disappointment. For years, she had tormented residents with petty fines and threats, claiming to uphold safety and order. Now the truth was clear. She had endangered the very neighborhood she pretended to protect. The verdict was immediate. The county issued a mandatory order for removal of the illegal structures, along with fines totaling thousands of dollars. The HOA voted unanimously to remove her from the board and suspend her membership privileges until compliance was verified. Karen sat frozen, her voice gone, her hands trembling slightly on the table. Around her, whispers filled the room, some triumphant, others pitying. The Bennetts said nothing. They didn't need to. As the crowd dispersed, Karen remained seated, staring at the folder that had undone everything. For the first time, she felt what she had made others feel, powerless and exposed. That night, she returned home to the silence of her perfect crumbling kingdom. The vines she had once used to hide her secret now hung lifeless against the wall, and the illegal room behind them seemed to mock her with every creak. But what she didn't know yet was that her troubles weren't over. The inspection team had one final follow-up scheduled to oversee the demolition, and during that visit, they would discover something buried beneath her secret room that even Karen hadn't known about. Something that would make Maple Ridge's gossip erupt into full-blown chaos. The morning of the demolition was somber and still. A gray sky hung low over Maple Ridge, and for the first time in years, Karen's driveway was crowded, not with guests or deliveries, but with county trucks, inspectors, and construction workers wearing bright safety vests. Her once pristine front yard was now trampled by heavy boots and machinery. Neighbors peeked through blinds and stood on porches, whispering as the sound of tools filled the air. The county had given her a week to comply with the removal order, but the process had been taken out of her hands. Her attempts to delay it through paperwork had failed. The structure had been declared unsafe, and the demolition was mandatory. Karen stood by the edge of her property, arms crossed tightly, her expression rigid. She felt humiliated, exposed, and powerless. Every clang of metal and thud of falling debris echoed like a personal punishment. The illegal room, the one she had so carefully hidden for years, was coming down piece by piece. The inspector, Mr. Dalton, supervised quietly, documenting every stage for the official report. The workers dismantled the outer vines and panels first, revealing the full extent of Karen's concealed addition. Once the walls were opened, the interior looked worse than expected. Mold, exposed wiring, and makeshift plumbing twisted through the space like a network of secrets. Then, as one of the workers began removing the floorboards, his hammer struck something solid beneath the foundation. It didn't sound like concrete, more like metal. He crouched down, brushing away dirt and insulation, until a large, rusted storage container came into view. Mr. Dalton stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. He ordered the team to clear around it carefully. As they dug deeper, the container revealed itself to be old, sealed, and heavy. Karen's eyes widened, a flicker of confusion replacing her usual composure. She had no idea what it was. The inspector pried it open with a crowbar, and the hinges groaned as if reluctant to expose what was inside. When the lid came free, everyone froze. Inside were dozens of binders, papers, and faded envelopes, all stamped with the old Hoey letterhead from nearly a decade ago. The inspector pulled one binder out, wiped away the dust, and opened it. Inside were records, financial documents, expense logs, and complaint forms, all connected to the original Hoey when Karen had first joined. But these weren't normal records. They contained unauthorized transaction fees billed to homeowners that had never reached the official Hoey accounts. Someone had been collecting payments under the table, and every single signature at the bottom of those forms belonged to one person, Carolyn Henderson. Karen. Gasps rippled through the gathered workers. Mr. Dalton's face hardened as he flipped through page after page of evidence. The discovery transformed the situation instantly. This wasn't just a building violation anymore. It was potential fraud. Karen stepped back, her knees trembling. She tried to speak, but her words came out broken, incoherent. She stammered that she didn't know those papers were there, that maybe a previous board member had stored them, but the dates, handwriting, and signatures told another story. The inspector called for the documents to be photographed and secured as evidence. The news spread through Maple Ridge before the sun even set. By evening, every house was buzzing. For years, Karen had fined neighbors for petty things, trash cans left out too long, paint color slightly off. Now the same neighbors were sharing screenshots of the scandal in group chats, calling her the queen of corruption. The HOA board convened an emergency session. The county forwarded the case for financial review, and an investigation was officially launched. Karen's reputation was shattered completely. She spent the night sitting in the dark, staring at the empty space where her secret room had once stood. The foundation was cracked open, the earth beneath it scarred and exposed, much like her life. Everything she had built, her power, her image, her home, had been reduced to rubble and paperwork. But the worst part wasn't over yet. The county's investigation would reveal one last truth, one final, devastating detail that connected her years of deceit to a neighbor she had tried to destroy. The truth that would end not just her status, but her place in Maple Ridge forever. The days following the discovery were a blur of sirens, whispers, and paperwork. The once quiet Maple Ridge community now pulsed with gossip, every conversation circling back to the same topic, Karen Henderson. County investigators combed through her property, photographing the dismantled addition and the incriminating binders. Each document painted a clearer picture of what had happened years earlier. When Karen was Hoey president, she had created a secret system of maintenance fees that never reached the official Hoey accounts. She had pocketed thousands over several years, money taken from her own neighbor. When the county merged the financial records with bank statements, the numbers aligned perfectly. Her name was everywhere. The fraud had been buried for years under layers of charm, intimidation, and bureaucracy, but the illegal addition had accidentally unearthed it all. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very structure she built to hide her secrets had become the reason those secrets surfaced. Karen's phone rang endlessly, from lawyers to journalists to furious former neighbors. She refused to answer, her blinds stayed shut. The once perfectly trimmed hedges grew wild, matching the decay of her reputation. One morning, 2 county officers arrived at her door with a notice of criminal investigation and a court summons. Financial misconduct, forgery, and violation of housing codes. 3 charges that could change her life forever. Karen barely recognized the reflection staring back at her in the mirror as she signed the paperwork. The woman who once strutted through Maple Ridge, clipboard in hand, now looked small and frightened. Her confidence had been stripped away piece by piece. Meanwhile, across the street, Daniel watched quietly. His house, once targeted for demolition, stood firm and proud. One. The repairs were complete, and the family was finally at peace. The irony of it all still amazed him. How the same inspector who came to tear down his dream home had uncovered the truth that vindicated him completely. The HOA issued a public apology to Daniel's family, reinstating their record and removing all false fines. The new board banned Karen from participating in any future community matters. She was effectively exiled from the world she once ruled. She left Maple Ridge before dawn, her car packed with boxes, her windows rolled up tight. No one came to say goodbye. As her taillights disappeared beyond the gate, the neighborhood seemed to exhale for the first time in years. The air felt lighter, freer, as if the shadow that had lingered over every mailbox and yard sign had finally lifted. In the months that followed, Maple Ridge changed. The HOA, under new leadership, reformed its rules. No more excessive fines, no more power games. The residents began holding community events again, rebuilding trust. Daniel's family hosted the first block party, turning the once cold street into a lively gathering of laughter, music, and forgiveness. But Karen's legacy remained a cautionary tale. Her story spread beyond the neighborhood, shared online as a warning of what happens when control turns to corruption. Some called it karma, others called it justice. The county report eventually concluded with a single powerful sentence: the concealed structure revealed concealed crimes. In the end, that line became the perfect summary of her downfall. For Daniel, it was closure. For Maple Ridge, it was a rebirth. And for Karen, wherever she went, it was a reminder that no secret stays buried forever. The demolition she wanted for someone else had become the metaphor for her own undoing. The walls she built to hide her sins had crumbled, leaving her exposed beneath the weight of her own choices. And as the neighborhood lights flickered on that final evening, the house she once ruled stood silent, empty, and stripped of everything. Except the memory of the woman who wanted someone else's home destroyed only to lose her own instead.